Let's continue Unit 4 with Lesson 13, the Constitutional Convention. Now guys, this lesson right here, Lesson 13, is one of the most challenging, but one of the most important that we'll do all year, because in this lesson, we're going to be talking about how the American government was created through the writing of the Constitution. There's some complicated ideas here, guys, so take your time, stop as you need to, go back and review as you need to, but let's move ahead here. Our teaks that we can identify the creation of the Constitution, that we understand the importance of 1787 as a date, that we can analyze the issues of the convention and the reasons why the framers of the Constitution had to compromise. That word compromise will be coming up a lot. And that we can summarize how these compromises resolve disputes peacefully. So let's continue. So it's time for a change. In Lesson 11, we learned about the writing of the Articles of Confederation. In Lesson 12, we learned why the Confederation government ultimately failed because it was too weak. So the need became obvious that we needed to strengthen the national government. So they agreed to meet in May 1787, and there's that date, guys, 1787. You need to commit that one to memory, just like some of the others we've had before. And the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia at what is now called Independence Hall, the same place where they wrote the Declaration of Independence. 12 states sent delegates, and a delegate means a representative. Rhode Island boycotted because, being the smallest state, Rhode Island was afraid that this new government would override and would take away the powers and rights of the small states. America's best and brightest. The convention delegates I like to refer to as a collection of all-stars because at the time they were some of America's most educated, most wealthy individuals, and nearly all of them had served in some role in government, either in Congress, the state legislatures, or as governors, but they had a wealth of government experience. We refer to them as the framers because the Constitution is the framework for all government in the United States. If you look at the picture here, just as this structure here provides the framework for this building, it shows you how big it will be, where the rooms are. Now, of course, we need to add floors, ceilings, windows, doors, and decorations, but nonetheless, the framework is all here for what this building will look like. Well, that's what the Constitution does for our government. It provides the framework upon which all laws are going to be based. Our convention leaders, one of these was James Madison. This is the first time we've really heard much about him. And he's from Virginia. He's referred to as the father of the Constitution. The reason for this is that he read extensively on government, studying back to ancient Greece and Rome and Europe. And so he prepared himself on law and was ready to participate in this process. He kept a detailed diary, daily notes on the convention, and he is our main source of convention history because during the convention the doors were sealed, the doors were shut, and no one else was allowed to enter. So he is our main source of knowing what went on during that time. He is the creator of the Virginia Plan, which we'll talk about soon, and the author of the Bill of Rights. And then we have, of course, another famous Virginian, George Washington, who was elected president of the convention. As the head of the Continental Army and a well-respected politician and leader, he was probably best prepared to lead the convention. There were a few important absences. Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, and John Adams, who helped him do that, they were not present because they were the ambassadors to France and Great Britain. Another important absence was Patrick Henry, the former governor of Virginia. He said that he smelled a rat and he refused to attend. So my question to you is, what do you think he meant by that comment that he smelled a rat? Two of the important founders of the Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, also did not attend. So the goals of the convention. The first of these, obviously, was to improve upon the Articles of Confederation. And the second goal became to create a strong federal government. And that term federal is one that we're going to be learning. A strong federal government while still preserving the state's powers and the individual rights. Now, the original plan was to revise the Articles, but they ended up scrapping them and starting over with a new constitution. And in doing this, an important word to keep in mind is compromise. And again, a compromise is when you make an agreement to settle a dispute in which each side makes concessions. Each side gives up a few things to the other in order to find a proper solution. And we call that sometimes meeting in the middle, like we see here in the sign, your say, my say. So the compromise is somewhere in the middle here. The first major issue of the convention was government. What is the structure of the U.S. government going to be? On the very first day, Edmund Randolph of Virginia proposed the plan that was written actually by James Madison called the Virginia Plan. And this called for a three-branch government with a strong executive branch. So we've realized that we need a strong executive in place along with the legislature. It had a two-chambered, the word is bicameral legislature. That means an upper and a lower house. Representation in the Virginia plan would be based on population. And this is going to favor the big states because states like Virginia that had more people would have more representation and say than, say, a small state like New Jersey with a smaller population. And that leads us to, well, the New Jersey plan. This was proposed by William Patterson of New Jersey. And in this, they still keep the idea of the three branches, but with a weak executive branch and one legislative chamber, and just like they had in the Articles of Confederation, and the legislature would be the most powerful branch. It also kept the idea of the Articles of one vote per state, so all the states are equal. So this plan favors small states because a state like New Jersey with a small population would have equal power to one like Virginia with a larger population. And that leads us to the Great Compromise, which, if I can speak my own opinion here for a moment, is one of the great ingenious accomplishments of American government and of the Constitutional Convention, in which they approved the Virginia plan, but they made compromises to actually bring both plans on board. So here we see Congress, which is the legislative branch of government. Congress is made up of two chambers, the House of Representatives, and this one is represented by population. The people elect the representatives directly as their voice in government, and they serve two-year terms. So in this one, a large state today, such as Texas, that has 36 representatives in the House, compared to, say, a state like Wyoming, which only has one because Texas has a much larger population. Then we look to the Senate, the other house. In the Senate, every state has two members, and the senators are elected at the time not directly by the people, but by the legislatures of the states. The idea was that the House represents the people and the Senate represents the states. Now, this was changed by the 17th Amendment, and today both senators and representatives are elected directly by the people. Senators, as you see, serve 6-year terms. The next issue was representation and taxes, and particularly should slaves count as persons or property. The northern states said that slaves are property, that they therefore should be taxed as property, but because they don't have any rights and they don't have any citizenship, they should not receive representation. So for the North, tax the slaves, yes, but representation, no. Now in the South, they said that slaves were part of their population, that therefore they should get representation, but that the slaves should not be taxed. So here we see an exact opposite. So it sounds like we need to have a compromise here. Would you agree? Well, let's see what that was. That compromise was the 3/5 compromise. So what they decided was that they would count 3/5 or 60% of the slave population for both representation and taxes. So as you see here, that here we have 5 slaves, but only 3 of them will be counted again for population representation and for taxes. The next issue is trade, and especially on the issue of the importation of slaves. The North wanted this to end. They wanted a ban on any more importation of slaves. They also wanted Congress to regulate commerce. Commerce means business and trade. And they wanted to be able to tax exports because theirs is a merchant economy. The South, on the other hand, they wanted no ban on the slave trade, especially South Carolina and Georgia. And they wanted no tax on exports because being an agricultural economy, they depended on exports for their living. So what they ended up doing was the compromise said that there would be no ban on the slave trade until 1808, 20 years later. They basically kicked it down the road. And that Congress could regulate commerce, but there would be no taxes on exports. Our next issue is the executive branch. Now, the idea of a non-royal head of state was kind of a recent idea. They were used to the idea of monarchs and they understood legislatures, but this idea of having a head of state who was not a monarch, well, they just didn't have much experience in that. So they had some questions. Would there be one executive or a group of 3? Would a single executive create a tyranny just like they had in Britain? And who's going to choose this executive? Is it going to be the people? Is it going to be Congress? Or are we going to have a special group? And how long a term should they serve? Should it be a limited term or a lifetime? And from this debate, they created the presidency. They chose a single chief executive who would be called the president, and that this person would serve a 4-year term limit before they had to be reelected. And later on in the 22nd Amendment, they would add a 2-term maximum for a maximum of 8 years or 2 terms. And that the Electoral College would choose the president and that the states would select their electors. Now, most folks think that through their popular vote, we are electing the president, but that's not actually the case. Each state gets the number of electors that they have in the House of Representatives plus the Senate. So essentially how many people we have in Congress. So let's look at the example of Texas. Texas has 36 representatives in the House plus its 2 senators. So Texas gets 38 electoral votes in the last election, 2012. And that will also be the case in 2016. If you look at some other states that have large populations, California has the most with 55 votes, Florida 29, New York also 29. But let's look at a state that has a small population such as, well, let's say South Dakota. South Dakota only has 3 electoral votes because they have 2 congressmen, one congressman and 2 senators. So that's how this works. And then really what you have is like 50 little mini elections. Every state is holding its own presidential election, and then we tally up the vote, and whichever candidate wins the majority of electoral votes. In today's politics, that is 270. With our 50 states, there are currently 200. You have to win 270 electoral votes to become president. All right, so let's continue. So a government is born. Well, almost at least. By September 1787, after the summer, the work was done. The final draft of the Constitution had been written, and it was approved by the convention delegates. Now, when I say approved, I don't mean it was unanimous. And in Lesson 14, we're going to learn about some of the people who opposed the Constitution as it was. So it was sent out to the 13 states for ratification, and once more, here's where the fun begins again. So let's look at our Lesson 13 thoughts. Number 1, how did the Great Compromise combine the ideas from both the Virginia and the New Jersey plans? Number 2, what main issue seems to have been a source of conflict between the northern and southern states? And what predictions can you make from this as we go forward in our U.S. history? Number 3, what can we infer about the framers? Remember what that word infer means. What can we infer about the framers from the successful compromises made to create the Constitution? Well, again, congratulate yourselves on getting through a very tough and challenging lesson here. And when we go on to Lesson 14, we'll talk about the Federalist versus Anti-Federalist. We'll see you then.